And we're live. Welcome back to another episode of Professor and the Idiot. I'm Nick Wolfinger.
And I am Dalton Whitehead.
What's on your mind this week, Dalton?
Something that I think is on about 75% of the country's mind. Is abortion murder, or is it a right? And is it something in between?
Let me just, before we start talking about that, let me just promise anyone listening that next week we'll have a guest. And the week after that, hopefully too. So you won't have to listen to the two of us run our traps the whole time. My first response is, when does life begin? I think that is a very difficult question scientifically. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not up on the science, but I remember reading the case that Steven Pinker, the Harvard psychologist, made, and he said there's no really one good answer about when life begins. So with that in mind, my answer will be the same answer enshrined by the Supreme Court, and that is viability. So after 6 months, when the baby can live outside the womb, could survive outside the womb.
Now, when people talk about viability, my first thought is, well, what if that changes? If technology becomes better and babies are able to be saved at 5 months, 4 months, and so on?
There is some value in thinking about a future that's not here yet, be it the future of viability in a month, the future of autonomous vehicles on the road, so we get some sense of what's to come. Under those conditions, we'll have to reassess, but then it's possible that babies can be born carried to term in test tubes, not just conceived. So that might totally remove the issue of abortion.
Yeah.
Now, who knows, right? You know me well enough to know that speculation often makes me nervous. I'm much more content to describe the world that was with the world that is. But yeah, we'll see.
Okay. Why do you think they chose that as a designation? Because, I mean, to me, when I look at pictures of 5-month-old fetuses, it looks like a baby to me.
What else could it be? Especially given medical knowledge in 1973. I know at that time that babies after 6 months were viable, but it wasn't great. There were likely to be, in cases when babies had to be delivered in 6 months, there was the possibility of grave health complications. I remember learning this in the first grade when there was a school meeting at my grade school in the auditorium, and that week we had a person who was blind at birth tell her story, and she's described being 3 months premature and losing her eyesight in that process. So that's how I remember, even in 1972 or 73, that the viability was possible, although not guaranteed at 6 months. So it's hard for me to see what other standard there could be besides viability.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily saying that distinction is wrong, but okay, I guess maybe we should frame it like this. Let's say a man is in a relationship with a woman and she's 5 months pregnant, and he punches the woman in the stomach.
Yes.
And that baby dies. Is that murder?
No, because the baby isn't viable.
So it's just assault on the woman?
Yeah, it's probably aggravated assault. I'm sure everyone would be so horrified that the punishment would be severe.
But why is it worse than punching a woman who's not pregnant in the stomach? If it's still not a life yet.
It's destroying that woman's hopes and dreams of being a mother.
Yeah, so that's kind of like how I feel. It's like, well, at 5 months, it is a life form. It has at that stage, especially, it has a heartbeat, and it has its own DNA, and it's pretty hard for me to look at that and go, that's not a baby, that's not a life. But that's just me personally.
Right. That woman has invested in emotionally and physically in carrying that baby. So that's why I think it's a much worse crime than just straight assault. But why would you draw then if you're not drawing it viability?
I don't know. That's why this is probably the most conflicted I've ever been on an issue. And I've thought about it not super deeply, and I've never needed to, or well, me especially, I've obviously never needed an abortion, but
don't lie.
I've never been with a woman who's had one or needed one, so I've never gone through that process. Yeah. So I try not to. I don't know. I'm very neutral on this subject. I just like to ask questions, see how people feel. Because the libertarian side of me definitely doesn't want a government telling a human what they can or can't do with their own body. But then also another part of me is like, yeah, I'm with you on that, but let's be real. That's a baby. It's a baby. That's just my instincts on it.
I think that's where I would disagree with you. I'm unlike you. I'm not conflicted. I'm firmly pro-choice, but I also understand that Americans are very conflicted on this. If you think it's murder, I'm probably going to have trouble persuading you otherwise. So I'm not in the habit of discussing this.
No, that's another thing. I'm like, wishy-washy on the whole murder aspect of it.
If it's murder, right?
Yeah, well, but to me, the way I would feel about a woman getting an abortion at 6 months, let's just use that deviation for this example, versus somebody breaking into somebody's house and killing a person with a gun. Those are two very different things. So I think a lot of it comes from intent, like when I think about murder, it's like I don't look at a mother who wants an abortion, right, or whether you think it's right or wrong. I don't think there's too many women that are pumped to have an abortion.
No.
And I know I understand it's a very difficult ordeal to go through. So to look at a mother and say you're a murderer, and it's like, well, I wouldn't really be psyched about that woman being put in jail for 20 years. That's the big deviation for me, is like, it makes me uncomfortable, and I'm like, damn, it's hard for me. But if someone's like, we're gonna lock this woman in a cage for 20 years because she had an abortion, I definitely would go, whoa, let's pump the brakes on that.
That seems inconsistent.
I know, but that's why
right?
That's why I'm so conflicted on this issue, because I'm definitely not the type of person that's like all in. It's a woman's body, it doesn't matter, and they can do what they want no matter what. I'm not like that far pro-choice, but I'm also not that far pro-life where I'm going to call a woman a murderer for having an abortion.
You may recall that during the 2016 presidential campaign, Trump, newly pro-life, of course, said something to the effect that we're going to punish the hell out of women who murder babies. And then the pro-life movement said, no, that's not how we think of this. We think about punishing doctors and making it illegal, but not punishing the women. And he backed off.
Yeah, I don't know, because I mean, how would you feel about a woman having an abortion at 8 months pregnant?
Well, I dated a woman who had an abortion at 6 months. It wasn't mine when she had been married before. And at 6 months, she learned that the baby would live just a few hours if she carried it to term. And the doctors counseled an abortion as less traumatic for her. But she said it was still devastating, and she screamed in the hospital and broke down. And then, went through with it, but was still knew she made the right decision, but was still devastated.
Yeah, when it comes to like medical issues, I mean, there's zero argument for me that if the health of the mother is in jeopardy, then yeah, you have to do what you have to do.
Health of the mother, definitely. What
Yeah.
about the baby, right? If the baby will be born and only live a few hours, can you justify abortion? Would you justify abortion at 8 months?
Yeah, I mean, if it's gonna die, it's gonna die.
I
So if we could make the process of the baby birthing, so to speak, the process of the baby exiting the woman's body easier and safer, then yeah, of course I would support that.
and probably less painful for the doomed fetus as well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, yeah, when health concerns are an issue, I'm all for it. I mean, it's then it becomes a medical procedure. But I think the way it gets framed by pro-life people, which I think is unfair, and I'm sure you can bring up some statistics, is that dumb women who were just fucking around with a bunch of dudes and not being responsible are going to get pregnant, and then they're going to get abortions at like 8 months, and they don't care about the babies. That's kind of the way it gets framed, and I know that's just not the case.
Yes, no one wants to have an abortion.
I do see, I don't know if I would call it a growing movement, but I've seen some videos online and I kind of get why they're doing it, but I've seen like protests where women talk about being proud of their abortions.
Oh yeah, that's a new thing, and I think they're not actually being proud of the fact they, had shit shoved up their cooches and tissue scooped out, but proud of the fact that they could make that decision and could have the procedure done safely.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of get their reasoning behind it is to not make it a shameful act, try and, I don't know, convince others or show others that like, hey, it's okay to have one.
Still,
Um,
think. Sorry, I interrupted you.
no, go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
was just going to go back to what the Clintons, I think Hillary said in the 90s, that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare.
Yeah, I mean, to me that makes sense. We talked about in past episode the sex education in this country is kind of a joke.
Yeah, we talked about that with David Lay.
Yeah. So I think that should be first, people who call themselves pro-life should be shouting from the rooftops to improve sex education in schools. I remember, being growing up in Utah, teachers couldn't even like bring up condoms at all, and it was all abstinence-based sex education, which is just a joke.
It's bullshit. It's the same people. Many of the people who are pro-life also want to have abstinence-only education in the schools and also want to make contraception harder to get. It's fucked up. If you want to reduce abortion, you should have sex education and make birth control plentiful, easy to get a hold of.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing when it comes to this issue is like prohibition of anything has never really worked. So as much as you may not like it, you're not really going to stop people from doing it.
Generally, I think
Generally.
true. Although,
So
although alcohol consumption in this country did go down during Prohibition,
yeah, I mean, I'm sure. I mean, if you're
wasn't
gonna get if you're gonna get locked in a cage for doing it, maybe somewhat less people will do it.
just have goon squads ready to bust your speakeasy and pour out all the liquor.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think it also created a lot of organized crime.
yeah. So I mean, if you point a gun at people, maybe less people will do it, but
Yeah,
I just don't see that being the answer.
yeah,
So
I agree with you.
to me, I would probably say I'm largely pro-choice because it's just like, well, I mean, I don't know what you're gonna do to stop it, so might as well, like you said, make it safe, legal, and as rare as possible.
I have a friend in Utah who's a physician, just a family physician, and he's also a liberal guy, but a churchgoer. And he said, "Yeah, I support a woman's right to choose, but I don't like abortion. I
I think that's fair.
yeah.
I think that's a fair stance to have. I mean, um, and I think a lot of people are kind of afraid to maybe say that like publicly sometimes because it just seems like people are so divided on this issue. You got to be either all in on one side or all in on the other, and if you're anything in between, then both sides hate you.
I will point out that that's not how America as a whole feels. If you look at data, most people in America support the availability of abortion. Most people in America also don't support totally unrestricted access to abortion.
Yeah. What do you think about the people who are pro-choice framing the argument as like these men shouldn't be deciding these rules? Like I see that argument a lot of, because largely politicians are male.
Right.
And I think at least from my perspective, it kind of gets framed as like it's only men that are wanting abortion to be restricted or completely
That's
outlawed.
not true. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of stats. I'm sure you can comment on this, but like, there is a pretty significant amount of women who are pro-life, right?
Oh, yeah. So just the data that I had readily available that I tweeted the other day showed that about half the country supported abortion for any reason. That is the most liberal measure. And there was no real gender difference there. So
Yeah.
what do I think about that argument? You know, on the one hand, there's the fact that there are plenty of pro-life women, and indeed a woman was the governor of Alabama who just signed that, in my mind, bullshit bill. But on the other hand, I see how there is some value to that formulation historically. My friend Vicky Larson, who's on Twitter and writes about family has made this point very, um, very forcefully to me and correctly, where for centuries childbirth was a huge risk for women. Many of them died.
Yeah.
Even if they didn't die, they were saddled with a beach ball in their stomach and then the responsibility for an infant, and men just didn't have that kind of buy-in.
Yeah.
And so the ability to uh, control your reproduction, is a landmark moment in the history of America and the progress towards a society that's equally fair for men and women. For just that,
Yeah.
that's hugely important to me. Should be important to all of us, but it's hugely important to me. And so that's how I see some value in seeing women uh, viewing this pro-life movement as an assault on their freedoms.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can't really argue against that. I think the bill in Alabama was sponsored by a few women, and the female governor signed it into law. Is that correct?
I don't know who the sponsors were. Um, all I know is about the female governor. I would assume that most of the politicians down there who moved it through government are men, but I assume that there are women too. But I
Yeah.
think that's sort of immaterial because there are many women who are pro-life.
Yeah.
And
I did find it interesting that that uh, conservative commentator Tommy Lauren, the one who's always angry.
I don't know him, but go on.
Oh, I'm sure. I guarantee you've seen some of her videos. She's like blonde hair, young conservative woman, and she's just
Oh, Tony.
very, very,
Yeah, Tony.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, but she's largely pro-choice.
Yeah, I saw that. That was a big sort of deal when that came out.
Yeah, I'm sure that was kind of hard for her because I think a lot of her fan base was probably disagree with her. But I did think that was pretty cool that you may be conservative or right wing, but it doesn't mean you have to be that way on every single issue.
Yeah,
And I think she's taken a lot of heat from it.
yeah. And Democrats need to have at least some acceptance. If you're a Democrat elected in Alabama, you may be pro-life, or you may at least believe in more restrictions on abortion. Any national party is a coalition of interests, and so not everyone is going to be as far left than you if you're a Democrat on abortion.
Yeah. Do you think like these abortion laws should be federally controlled? That way we don't have these crazy flare-ups and debates every time a state has a vote on it.
Yes, I would like that, and I will offer the history lesson on Roe v. Wade in defense of that point. So in 1965, there was a Supreme Court case called Griswold versus the state of Connecticut. And what that case did was secure a constitutional right for married couples only to have birth control. And before that, it could be outlawed, which is sort of amazing. And it did so under a right of privacy, which is not in the Constitution, but the judgment on Griswold said there are certain rights that emanate from the Constitution that aren't listed but should be implied by the text there. And that's the reasoning I agree with, because the Constitution is an amazing document, but it's not a perfect document, and times change. And the Constitution has been amended accordingly. And so, flash forward to Roe v. Wade in 1973, which was also decided on the basis of privacy, namely a woman's private relationship with her doctor. And so when 20 years later, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was, now the America's foremost feminist icon, was approved to the Supreme Court, many feminists didn't like her, and that's because she had been critical of Roe. She pointed out that it would have been better if this had happened via legislation rather than a court, just 9 old men. At this point, it was eight. At that point, it was 8 white guys and 1 African American man. Legislation would give it more legitimacy. And she also said it would have been better if this had been decided on the basis of the Equal Protection Clause in the amendments, which is actually listed right there. That is, we all are entitled to equal protection in front of the law. That would have been stronger than this emanated right of privacy. So that's my lecture on the constitutional history of this.
Fascinating.
You're lying.
No, it's good. I think history is important when it comes to this stuff. Why do you think it's typically the conservative Christian religious, not just Christian, but religious types are so hell-bent on being pro-life?
I will, again, resort to history to explain this. Traditionally, into the 1970s, Democrats were much more likely to be pro-life. Many Democrats were Catholics, Irish Catholics, Italian Americans, that kind of thing. And Catholics were the ones who had the strong doctrine against abortion. And Republicans, on the other hand, were more likely to be pro-life, pro-choice on the grounds of limited government. Then in the 1970s, as politics started changing, social conservatives tried to look to ways to get voters to the polls. And so one of the biggest social issues in the early 70s was busing. Would schools be forcibly integrated with busing kids? And there were huge protests against busing in Boston, which were all Democrats, against busing, but there were riots and people were beaten up. And there was also a big fight about textbooks in West Virginia. And so all those people who were protesting were all Democrats, but conservatives started to see an opening. Say, what if we seize on these conservative issues? Will that help us in the polls? And then they decided abortion would be a good one. And until they decided that in the 70s, it was not a big political issue. The last Republican president we had who was openly pro-choice was Gerald Ford in 1976, and the convention didn't mention it then. But by 1980, Ronald Reagan seized on it, and the Republicans have been pro-life ever since. So, although, probably privately, the George and Herbert Walker and Barbara Bush were pro-choice, but they couldn't say it.
Okay.
So basically, it was an issue brought to the masses by, very smart political people realizing this is an issue we could really get our base to care about. But you'll see that there was, right after Roe v. Wade, there wasn't a bunch of Republican outrage. That came a few years later.
So you think it's mainly has just been used as a tool to maybe gain support or controversy?
At first, yes, but now it's real. And really, since I think Reagan embraced it in 1980, it's been very real.
Yeah. Do you maybe somewhat sympathize with pro-life people? Like, do you get where they're coming from?
So I understand that if you think it is murder, if you really think it's murder, then I could see why you would be pro-life. But at this point, my argument for choice changes. It's not all the stuff about when does conception begin and all that, but it's the question of thinking about what it would be like to live in a country without abortion. And that it's horrific to think about women returning to a days of illegal abortions, which were very dangerous.
Yeah.
Now, what happens if Roe v. Wade is overturned? It goes back to the states. That means we'll have a bunch of pro-life states and a bunch of pro-choice states. So let's say Utah goes pro-life. If you have money in Utah, no problem. You just fly to California and have your abortion. But then if you don't have money to do that, it becomes basically a policy that only affects you. I also don't want to be in a world where women have to carry children they don't want to term. That will be terrible for the kids and terrible for the women.
Yeah. If a woman doesn't want a baby, I kind of doubt she'll be the best parent.
So in addition to beefing up sex education and birth control, I think we should do more to make adoption easier. We should offer tax credits to defray the very considerable expense of adopting a child. Between the last estimates I saw were between $15,000 and $25,000.
And where's that money going to? Like who? Like why is somebody being, like, so to speak, charged that much to adopt?
That's a good question. In a foreign adoption, I can understand. If you have to go to Africa and spend 2 weeks there and basically pay for the agency that's finding matching kids with parents, and maybe the government is trying to make some money off this because poor countries need American dollars, need Western dollars. I can understand. In America, it should be less. I don't know. You're paying the agency, you're paying the matching, you're paying attorneys. I don't know why it's expensive in America.
No.
Good question.
Yeah, because I know there's a lot of parents out there that would love to adopt, but maybe can't because of the cost. So
Yeah, definitely. We should make this easy for them. It was a blow a few years ago when, just as part of diplomatic tit for tat, Russia banned American adoptions of Russians.
That's interesting.
Maybe about 6 years ago, and Russia is a very large, poor country, so there was a lot of adoptions going on.
Well, those poor kids.
Yeah,
But do you feel like maybe parents should be more pressured to adopt? Well, I guess is it a purely cost thing when people adopt outside of the U.S.?
I don't know. I think it's complicated because you're dealing with. I mean, think about who's involved, right? A woman in another country, possibly her parents, possibly the foreign government, the agency in the other country. However, we regulate it in this country. I don't know exactly what the legal status is in this country, but there's got to be some. If you just suddenly reappear and you have a baby, so
Yeah.
yeah, I'd love to. So I don't know how much we can do about making foreign abortions cheaper, but well, we could still offer tax credits to pay for it.
Yeah.
It's good. It's good for everyone. So that's what is especially galling about Putin banning Russian adoptions, because he was essentially fucking his own people.
Damn.
Yeah, but what's new?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't know what else I have to add to this. I mean, if you put a gun to my head and said, "What are you?" I would say I'm pro-choice. So, but it would make me a little uncomfortable. I guess a lot of it's the time aspect, which is a weird aspect to this issue. Is, if a woman was 1 month pregnant, got an abortion, I wouldn't really think twice about it. But then if time progresses, that's when it gets a little bit stranger and stranger. And that's like a weird aspect to this issue.
But I was thinking about that when you said that the other day, and I have another way of looking at it. That's the question of cut points is attendant in almost any social policy you can think of, right? At what income level do you cap the benefits? At how long does a prisoner serve, right? This doesn't answer the question. It just says, to some extent, that it's a generic question. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That'll always be tough. At least it'll make it easier for me in discussing this that there are constitutional standards I can point to about viability and.
Okay, so if a woman did get an abortion for no medical reason past 6 months, is that a crime?
The law says that a state can feel free to make it illegal.
Okay, but would you be okay with that being a guideline of like, hey, you've had plenty of time and there isn't a medical reason for it?
So without a medical reason, I think I'm okay with that limitation. I'm sure that will make some people on my left unhappy. I would I'll defend it at least by saying that, it's giving some ground to the pro-life, to the other side, just compromising some. I also wonder how often that really happens.
Yeah, I assume it's insanely rare.
I know there are several thousand late third trimester abortions in this country, but I don't know how many percentage of them are besides for medical reasons. I don't even know how many states that's legal in. I should have looked that up before doing this. I just Googled this. Even in, we often on the left look to European countries as positive role models for the United States, but many of, they don't all allow, abortions at not 8 months. Most of them allow it for less time than in the U.S.
Okay.
And so I'm looking. Yeah, so it's not that many states that allow it past 25 months. 25. I'm sorry, 25 weeks. And so, 43 states ban abortion after a certain point of pregnancy.
Yeah, that seems to make sense.
But again, I certainly wouldn't want a total ban there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I certainly would want, only, certainly want those medical exemptions we discussed.
Oh yeah, for sure. I feel like the medical, aspect of it should have almost no limitations. I don't know. I mean, it's like one of those things that's like up to you and your doctor.
Yeah.
So it's hard to regulate that.
I mean, that's indeed was in the language of Roe v. Wade. It was leaving it up to women and their doctors. Yeah. So I'm looking at this, and for example, California, New York, Hawaii, all limit it at 25 weeks. Which is about when viability starts.
Yeah.
And so I don't know of the 7 states that don't place time limits. absolute time limits, what they're doing, if they are just, if they're allowing it for any reason at 8 months and 3 weeks, or only for questions of health. I don't. Yeah, I don't.
Well, I appreciate talking about this stuff with you, Nick, because you're much more informed and.
I'm really not.
I think you're much more informed than the average American on this issue.
I mean, I've read some of the history, the history of the law and the Constitution, but in terms of knowing state law or questions about the science about when life starts, forget it.
Well, I don't think anybody has an answer to that.
No, but I don't know about shit about zygotes and yeah.
One thing I feel like I wouldn't say a lot, but I've seen definitely more than once is people's opinion on this issue changing after they have children.
Yeah, I'm sure that happens.
Yeah. One person in particular, the libertarian podcast I listened to, he obviously libertarian, was pro-choice, and then he had a daughter, and then he's just like, man, my feeling very conflicted, and it's a weird thing, when you go through the whole process with a woman, and obviously him having his child was intentional, so it was a very joyous circumstance.
Right.
So I think that could definitely change how you view it, but I feel like maybe this happens quite a bit to people is once they have a kid, it kind of changes their perspective on it. So I would love to, if there was a survey or something asking women like how you felt about this issue before and after having kids. I'd be very curious to see like if it on a mass scale changes women's perspective, and maybe not changes it like a 180 switch, but maybe just their personal feelings on it changes. I'd be curious to see that.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Well, I could actually look at data. I have the data I was looking at last week and posted on Twitter. I could easily look at, whether there's a difference by the presence of kids or not.
Yeah.
All right, I'll do that. If anyone is still talking about abortion.
I don't see the issue going away anytime soon, but I'm sure as at least the gigantic scale that it's being talked about right now will die down eventually.
Oh, I saw something that was one of the worst takes on abortion, and Rabbi Josh tweeted back at me that he'd had a worse one. Have you followed Rabbi Josh Uter?
No, I don't know who that is.
He has about 50,000 followers. He's an American, but he returned to Israel to be a rabbi, and he's a bright, interesting guy. And he said the worst take I saw on abortion was the pro-life take saying that we have to wait till the baby's born so we can DNA test them so we can identify, get DNA to compare to the rapist.
Oh, yeah, I saw that, and then I think did Kathy Young comment about this? Did she?
Maybe someone else tweeted it. Yeah, it was just...
Yeah, well, she's like, you're an idiot because you can DNA test fetuses.
Yeah.
So.
The one I tweeted, someone who basically, a pro-life person who was somehow making, a former head of a big pro-life organization, somehow making an argument that pregnancy is equal to slavery. It was just nonsensical. And my tweet was, I think I said something about the effect that, America is a country riven by the abortion debate. Here, I'll stop talking about it. I'll read it verbatim. I said, I can pretty much stop talking about the Alabama abortion bill. In fact, our sundering American debate is over. All America, pro-choice or pro-life, can agree that Lila Grace Rose has written the dumbest fucking tweet on this subject or any other.
Twitter.
I got 11 likes, no retweets, 3 comments. Most of it was from Rabbi Josh.
Um, well, all right. I don't think I have much to add on this.
All right, let's call it.
Yeah, let's call it.
All right. Thank you for listening. If you like what you heard, go on Apple Podcasts or YouTube or wherever else you listen to podcasts and give us a good rating so that others may find out about our greatness and we can expand our social media juggernaut. And if you don't like what you heard,
Go fuck yourself.
I feel sorry for you.
Yeah, come on. It's two friends having a conversation. How can you not like it?